Hello and welcome to The Solar Panel, the podcast focusing on all things ESG within the warehouse, logistics and fulfillment sector. Joining me today and becoming the first member of the panel of experts is Luke Rowson, Head of Energy Management at Perfect Sense Energy. Hi Luke.
Hi Tony, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. Sat in our external office, rather chilly, but otherwise good.
I've been in your external office. It's more of a porter cabin, but it's very nicely decked out.
It is, yes.
In fact, it is a porter cabin. There's no discarding the fact, is there? That is exactly what it is.
No, it is an external polystyrene.
Right, let's get straight to it then, Luke. I've got 2 or 3 questions for you.
Yep.
Obviously, energy supply contracts, massive topic for businesses, bit of a minefield, I certainly think it is. What should people do with respect to their energy supply contracts? And can we be thinking maybe 20 years in advance?
I think certainly there's multi levels to what people should be considering and when. Traditionally, a lot of businesses and sort of, I suppose, consultants in a respect have a view of 3 to 6 months out from a contract end date. That's when they should start to look at things. And if COVID's taught us anything, that's definitely not the right thing to do. Both going into COVID and then coming out of it, we've seen huge price volatility that's never been seen before. We've seen complete market lows during COVID and complete market highs this last year or so. And anything, just in the longer a view businesses can have of their energy contracts and when they end, the more in control and the more they can manage that risk associated with those price increases. So
most people behave like me then. They wait for 3 months to finish, then they ring a broker and go, hello, right, what can we do? And then you're left with a short-term view. Is that what you're saying?
You've got 3 months left to go. Either the market's going to stay as it is and not going to change a lot, or you're completely at the mercy of the market. If something dramatic happens, you can't, the decision will be made for you as to when you sign a contract. It'll be, holy hell, the market's jumped 50%. We have to lock it in now. Whereas if you're not necessarily extending a contract on a 5-year horizon, but if you've got a view that actually we know at present our contract ends in 4 years, at present the position is for our next contract, it's likely to be a 40% increase. You can start making changes to your behavior as a business and also to the generation within the business over that 4-year period to mitigate some of those increases or avoid them altogether by not using that electricity. And then certainly if you're reviewing it every quarter, I think is not particularly onerous, particularly if you're using a broker. They'll probably be more than willing to throw prices at you once a month if you ask them to, but once a quarter, once every 6 months to review pricing for when your contract ends will just give you as much an informed decision as you can have. And then in my opinion, it kind of stops any rogue brokers taking advantage of dramatic market events to push you into an overpriced contract.
So I've got 14 months to go, Luke. What should I be doing now?
For yourself, you've got obviously you can start looking at fixed prices now. There are some obviously I think you've got a relatively small consumption, partly from the solar that you got in and the nature of your business, but you can start looking at where prices will be. And I think from memory of your contract, you're probably looking at a 50 to 70% increase from your contract last time round, which I know was a pretty hefty increase when we did it, wasn't it?
It was. We were at 15p. Our energy company went bust 6-8 months before. It was honoured to the end of the contract. We went from 15 to 35p. I think we were lucky that we got in April. I know some people were forced to renew in sort of July and August and were paying 70p on a 2 or 3 year contract. So yes, I am expecting it to go up from 35p. But you think it might go up another 50%?
Potentially. I think we're sort of seeing the prices, those wholesale prices have come down a lot at the market level. That hasn't quite been passed through to resale pricing on the supply side. But if you were to look, say, conservatively, 45 to 50p could be where your contract may be at. That will probably start to improve the ROI of other energy measures that you haven't yet uncovered, or bring a few to the table that didn't make sense at 15p, but make sense at 50p.
So in my case, then, is there any benefit in doing anything in the short term? The next 2 or 3 months, fix a price 12 months out, or is it worth waiting?
With what the market's done in the last few months, certainly since sort of end of October, perhaps even before then, the market has been ticking down quite steadily, and it looks at present poised to continue for a bit longer. I think the big question everyone kind of has is around Asian demand for LNG. A lot of our low pricing is because of the surplus of LNG deliveries we've got to Europe and to the UK. If Asian demand for LNG spikes up to sort of pre-COVID levels, like it could do, then we could see over 2023 our prices all climb up again. Not necessarily as high as they were at their peak, because I think there's a lot of risk attached to that pricing, but certainly we could go back into the more unsavoury levels of 70, 80, 90p. Certainly it's probably a case of reviewing the contract options in end of March, early April, just to see. And then if that's acceptable. I
think what I've taken from that, Luke, is if you're a small to medium-sized energy user, get a good quality broker and have a conversation every 3 months, irrespective of where you are in the contract cycle, because it might alter your strategy even 12, 18 months out from a renewal date.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because for most of that kind of users, most brokers, they can give you a price at a click of a button. It's not, if anyone tells you otherwise, it's not a particularly onerous task to get a price for that kind of consumption. It's not like they're going to have to spend days and weeks trawling over spreadsheets for you. It's just a click of a button and they'll give you a price.
And I could forward buy electric now for April 2024.
Yes, yeah, you could do. There'd be limited options in terms of suppliers. A lot could get a price.
If myself or the broker, if myself or the broker thought that was a good idea, we could do it that far in advance.
Yes.
Great. But what about big users? What do big users need to consider from a 20-year standpoint? Because I know you deal with some, and I've dealt with some in the last 12 months. Some people out there do use an extraordinary amount of energy.
Yes. For them, it's I suppose it's the similar advice. The sooner you look, the better. Again, some big energy users, particularly those that are in more of a sort of a corporate restriction, if you like, they tend to be quite rigid in their procurement process. Or we look at this point, we look at that point, and then they do the tender rounds, great, but they only look in that that a nominal window of time that's got no real relevance to the market or anything. It's the same view for them. Understand where the market is. They may be able to go into a flexible contract where they'll have, or the consultant they appoint will have more control over when they purchase their energy, and they can set a risk strategy and acceptable amounts of risk that they're willing to take as a business for the long term. And actually, they will probably be able to do a bit more. For example, if you think in some prices are available right out till 2027, they could, if they feel that that's a good price and are happy to take that price, start to lock out high risk periods. So say, for example, they're a business that has really, really high winter gas use for whatever reason. They might choose to start locking out some of their winter periods now to avoid being in a risky situation in the future, or being in a position where if the market moves suddenly, they just have to pay through the nose for it. It's largely the same advice. Take that longer view, perhaps look to get a flexible contract in place, or look to set up a future framework. So there is no price necessarily attached to the energy element of those invoices or that contract, but the framework is there. So with a nice opportunity or an opportunity of good pricing comes available, someone can act on that and take advantage of it whilst it's there, and start to build out a future price that de-risks where we are now. I think everybody in 2020, I think coming out of 2021, everyone took the view of, we'll just do 6 months, we'll just do a year, we'll wait and see, the market will come down. In 2022, that didn't happen. And a lot of people had those 200, 300, 400% contract increases. we have seen that start to reverse, but who knows? We are still in uncharted waters as to where the market may go in 2023. So start taking that longer view.
Is there sort of a minimum sort of energy consumption level where these flex baskets start to become, you sort of don't qualify kind of thing?
On a basket, I suppose on an individual basis, if the customer's using between 2 and 5 million kilowatt hours of either gas or power, there's something quite meaningful you can do. We do quite a work with a couple of buying groups, and their customers individual members are quite small, but the collective volume breaches that threshold, so we can do something with them as a whole. I think the one thing to consider, obviously, is that the flexible contracts do generally have higher management fees, both from the suppliers and the consultants most of the time. So it's just understanding how much, because there is obviously additional risk on the end user for having a flexible product in place and having that arrangement. It's just considering that, does the extra risk versus rewards stack up for them? I don't think anyone can really tell you otherwise. It's up to that business to decide, this is the risk, this is the potential rewards, and does that align with what we're trying to achieve and what we're willing to absorb as risk?
Yeah. And then there are some really big users. I guess they get there, with a good quality broker, they get a basket all of their own, and they can go negotiate better deals. Or does it not work like that?
To an extent, there are some super users that will get slightly discounted prices because their overall volume can help suppliers sort of stabilize an overall portfolio. A lot of the time, a broker will have a single large client that will be their anchor point, if you like. So they'll have a big client, and then they'll use that volume to leverage other smaller users into the same basket. But generally, again, it's just for those kind of businesses where you're talking up to a couple of £1 million a month in spend. You'd like to think that they've got a very well-trusted consultant in place already, or they'll probably have that in-house team who can support them with that.
You would hope so. I suffer from nervous laughter. So I think I laughed then because there was a bit of nervousness that somebody might not have a decent consultant in when they're spending
yes,
£2 or £3 million a year on energy supply. What are the things the businesses need to do, Luke, when considering energy sort of supply contracts? What else is there on the periphery outside of dealing with a broker?
So there are, I suppose that one of the fundamental things that we still find a lot of sort of traction points with customers is that people don't have good visibility of their data, of their usage data. Yeah. If you think that people view it as just the usage data equals what it costs us, which is by and large correct. But usage data is also your usage profile. And when suppliers are building your price, your usage profile has a factor in that. But the reason the usage data is relevant is that billing, which is it's an obvious fruit, but you can't. It's that old adage of we can't measure what you can't see, or vice versa. And that if you have a more accurate profile of your usage, the contract will be more accurate in a sense, but also it's easier for you to see billing errors, easier for you to see where you've changed the shift pattern, for example, and you'd expect a 10% reduction in certain time periods and you haven't had those reductions. So the data not only feeds the contract, but then starts to set you up for energy saving measures and energy management steps to further reduce the amount of energy you use. And we still have lots of customers who are on non-half, particularly customers that have got non-half hourly meters, so relatively small electricity meters, and a lot of gas meters have no smart data, so they'll get 8 months of estimated bills, give a meter reading, and then suddenly get a huge bill for what they've actually used. So it particularly where the market is and how hard times are going to be, smoothing out the cash flow by having data that is your data, and it's your data, so you might as well get it out of your business. Having that smooth and the cash flow smoothed out just makes a bit of sense.
I think the data point is very, very valid. We put solar on the roof in the spring, And it came to sort of October, and we turned the heating on, and I could see when people had left electric heating on through the energy usage app attached to the solar system.
Yes,
and
through the EPM.
If we left 2 heaters on over the weekend, that would cost the company £45 in electric. It was just totally wasted. So I think you're very valid on data. People understanding the data will also help them walk around a building and go, okay, we know things are getting left on at night. Where are they? What do we do about them? And that's just a nighttime benefit.
Yeah, and obviously an initial instance, just meter data, so data that comes out of electricity or gas meter, or in your case, the solar inverter data, is sufficient for most people for the first 6 to 12 months. It gives you a profile, and then if you start to see errors within that over the next sort of year or so, that's when you can start getting nitty gritty and go down to the circuit level, machine level monitoring, and then really hone in if you want to. And then from that monitoring, you then can layer controls on top of that.
I know we're moving slightly away from energy supply contracts, but I do have one more question. I think sort of relevant. Do most people with online accounts, are they able to download their own half-hourly data? Is that relatively easy for them to get to, or do they have to constantly write to the provider to get it?
So depending on who their supplier is, it does vary from supplier to supplier. Most have portals available, some that are better than others, but we tend to try and appoint a data collector that we know and like, and that gives us accurate data readily. That then gives the customer their own portal, and they can see the data day plus one. So the day after, or the day plus a bit after the data was used, it'll be there in their portal to them to see and just download it when they want. But as a standard, some suppliers, you'll just get a copy of your Excel data once a month in the email with your bills on it.
Forgive me, I don't understand the phrase data collector. What is that?
So for a half-hourly meter or any meter that's got a smart meter, a data collector will be appointed, and they are an independent organisation for the most part that dials into your meter of an evening and takes the data out, essentially. So all your half-hourly data or your billing data that's in that meter, the data collector goes in, dials in, takes it out, and then that data will then be shared with the supplier for billing purposes.
Right, so it's a service provided support contract of some description.
Yeah. So every half-hourly meter has a data collector appointed, whether it's through a contract with the customer or whether it's a supplier-appointed data collector. But every half-hourly meter will have one.
Superb. I think final question, Luke. What's going to happen to energy supply contracts in 2023? Where do you see prices going?
I think at present, we're in a relatively nice spot. Prices are tumbling fairly consistently. As I mentioned previously, since around October, November last year, they're tumbling nicely. The big one to watch, I think everyone is viewing, it doesn't really seem to be Russia and Ukraine anymore. That's kind of settled down. There's short of something truly catastrophic happening now. The world's adapted to those pricing factors. But if Asian demand for LNG climbs dramatically, and with the price cap on gas in sort of Europe, mainland Europe, if Asia starts to attract a much higher price and more attractive price, those LNG sort of day ahead cargoes, they'll go over there. And then when we start to hit winter or start to look to refill European gas storage, we'll see prices could shoot up again. So at present, not much to worry about, but it's a case of seeing what happens in Asia. If their demand surges as expected or potentially expected, we could see things get much more expensive.
Does that mean there's normally seasonal variability that's sort of consistent within the energy supply market?
Traditionally, there is. And obviously, traditionally, again, it was largely that power prices were linked to gas prices in a roundabout way, and oil and gas prices were also in a roundabout way linked. What's happening now more so is that electricity and gas have become quite decoupled in the market. Electricity will do one thing and gas can sometimes do another, particularly when there's a large amount of renewables in place. So for example, we saw over the Christmas period, day ahead and within day pricing for electricity in the UK reached a negative point. So it was, generators were actually were not generating because there's that much wind and such low demand that electricity prices were negative. So if you, as we see that more, and that's one of the things that we're learning. I think a couple of years ago, we had a really expensive winter for electricity pricing because there was no wind blowing across mainland Europe, and demand for electricity was high, and we had the reverse of that this year, and that seasonality will come. So we'd expect that in summer, we'll have much more solar generating in the UK. So you'd expect that electricity prices should be lower. We didn't see that last year because of Russia and Ukraine, and the thing we had the French interconnector caught fire, I think early July, August. So that contributed to that. But we would expect to see that sort of standard variation of gas prices traditionally drop in summer, and power prices would usually fall with that. And with renewables, it just distorts that curve a little bit.
One of the bodies I hear talked about a lot is Cornwall Insights. I think they do sort of forward predicting. How easy is it for people to get their data? Pretty
easily. I think it's a case of you just register with their website and get access to their free reports. And they do a lot of training modules and things like that as well. So they are well respected.
I know, because I had one of my clients contact me a few months ago to ask me what the forward forecaster was, and I had to get you involved. So maybe I'll go and do that myself.
Yes, well,
that's good, and I'm sure people are very interested in that as well.
Yeah, well, I think it was only yesterday, day before, the new 2030 forecast dropped into our mailbox. So we'll be sharing that with you in due course. But yes, things that, as mentioned before, the prices have dropped a bit. So I think from the October report, I think prices have dropped about £70 a megawatt for the 2023 forecast. So heading in the right direction. I think we're still 2 to 4 times where prices were pre-COVID in terms of electricity cost.
Yes, and I know the forecasts are to come down, but I think I agree with you. From I've only been in the energy field for 12 months, but the volatility is the bit where I think there's still some pricing in there, and where the risk comes. So it's not going to be an easy couple of years, I don't think.
No, definitely not, and that's sort of why we try and suggest get hold of your data now, look at your contracts early, and then use that to make informed decisions of where you can reduce energy. I think it's the ultimate. The only big win is to not need to buy it.
I have one more question, and I think we're probably done.
Yeah.
What would do you have a golden nugget of information where you see people make mistakes time and again, and would you be happy to share that with us? What does that look like? What's the one thing people get wrong that your knowledge means you can point us all in the right direction?
That's the question, isn't it? Again, I think leaving things too late, or I suppose it's the old ostrich impression, isn't it? Burying the head in the sand. I don't know where it's come from. I don't know what sort of started it, but there's a lot of business owners that or people in management decisions in businesses that have quite a blind view of prices will come down, or no, I'll wait. And the amount of businesses that have absolutely hamstrung themselves on energy cost because they won't listen to the information that's in front of them. I think it's try and beat the markets. The energy market's changing rapidly across all fronts, and no one is an expert at this moment in time. There are some lots of people that know far more than even myself, etc. But no one has all the answers, and I think people need to be more open-minded with their views on when to do things, how to do things, and what good looks like. Because we're probably never going to get your 13, 14p contract again in potentially for the next 10, 20 years. I
agree with that.
So I think just people need to unpick their sort of their set views or their preconception of what the market does and how it operates, and just take a fresh view and listen to trusted advice, because there's a lot of there's the unscrupulous brokers out there that will just try and sell you anything, but then there's a lot of really respectable, trustworthy consultants and sort of knowledge centers out there. Just go and absorb what you can.
go and hunt one of those down. I think that's the underlying sort of theme of today. Don't leave things too late. Get into the habit of a 3-monthly review with your broker. Get to understand it all. Get to understand your data. And then use a bit of sort of forecasting from people like Cornwall Insights and do your best. And if you do those things, you'll probably save a few quid. And if you're a big company, you might save a lot of quid.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all for this edition of the Solar Panel podcast. All that's left for me to do is thank my guest today, Luke Rowson from Perfect Sense Energy. Thank you for your knowledge, Luke.
No, thanks for having me.
I'd also like to thank the producer and marketeer extraordinaire, Kyle Swindells, for all his help putting the podcast together. My daughter, Florence, said I need to say this bit. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell, whatever that means. My name is Tony Gresty. That was the Solar Panel podcast. Until next time, I hope the sun keeps shining. Have a great day.